Let's go. Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. I'm your host, David Horsager. Join me as I sit down with influential leaders from around the world to discuss why leaders and organizations fail, top tactics for high performance, and how you can become an even more trusted leader. Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. It's David Horsager. I've got a special guest today. He and his brother built a company to $20 million in revenue in their 20s. He's been named as 40 under 40, and he's almost turning 40 coming up here in just a few days now. But he has written 4 amazing books. He's got 5 kiddos and an amazing wife. He really thinks about whole leadership, which I love, as far as leading his family well, faith, friends, and his business, and even certainly an advisor and leader to others. Welcome to the show, Ty Bennett.
Hey, so good to be here with you. Such a fan, and this is fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and grateful for you to, we have some pretty neat people in the show, but to call you a friend. And so this is going to be especially fun. So tell us something else we don't know about you. What's the newest?
Well, 5 kids keeps you busy. I mean, you know what it's like to be running after kids. So I've got kids 15 down to 1 right now. Very active, involved in soccer, Ninja Warrior, different things that we're doing. So lots going on there. And, in the business space, it's kind of an interesting world you and I both are living in. Well, we're all living in, right? Lots of live events, virtual events, hybrid events, and just getting back with people has been amazing and something I missed for sure. And but I think there's never been a bigger need for inspiration and for people to understand how to move forward and the importance of leadership and some of the things that we'll talk about today, I'm sure. I just feel like there's this huge desire and need for that with what our world is facing. So I'm excited to be out there sharing that message.
Well, I am so proud of how you lead yourself. And, we see each other a couple times a year at some things we were a part of together and certainly cross paths. I'm going to jump into personal in a little bit, but I'm going to start macro. I want to talk about 2 of your books just to jump right in. And then we'll come back to some things that I think at the end will be even more inspirational and powerful and get back to even that first company you built. But if we look at this, I'm so interested. Partnership is the new leadership. Everything we talk about is trust. Everything we think about here is trust. Everything we believe, kind of centers around trust, but there's nothing like the word partnership to align with trust. Give us a quick overview, and I want to get into a couple ideas under that work.
Yeah, I think that it definitely aligns with your message. I'm a huge fan of all of your work and the idea that trust is that currency that drives relationships, leadership, business growth, influence. So I did a survey of 5,000 leaders over a couple of years, asking them specifically one question, and that was, what do you want from your people? Right? From a leadership perspective, what do you want? And 76% of people came back and said that what they want is commitment, which makes sense, right? The people who work for me, the people I work with, I want commitment. But then I took a step back and said, okay, then what drives commitment? Because people aren't committed to jobs. I mean, statistically, you will hold over 30 jobs in your lifetime if you graduate from college this year, which is crazy when you think about it. What drives commitment more than anything else is people are committed to people. And so I truly believe that leadership, it's not about title. It's not about position. It's not about authority. I believe the way you show up for your people impacts the way they show up for you. And this idea of partnership being the new leadership, it's the approach of the most relevant leaders in today's world. It's the kind of leadership that gets the most out of your people. It's the great differentiator within organizations, right? Because all of us need our people to show up at a higher level to compete and to be competitive in our space. And so I think that it's a mindset. I think it's an approach, but there's some practical application as I've studied it out in terms of how these leaders lead effectively.
What do they do? Because you can think about this, you can say we're partners, but you own the company. You can say we're partners, but this. You can say we're partners, so how do we kind of enlist that, encourage that, create that? What are some things we can do?
Absolutely. I'll give you just a couple of ideas. I mean, one, I think they're very good. Partner leaders are very good at building genuine relationships with their people. I think they know them. I think they care about them. I think they invest in them. I think those relationships are solid. And because of that, their people will show up and invest in them, right? They'll reciprocate that. I think that when you lead from a partnership perspective, everyone on your team has a voice. I'm a big believer that people support what they help create. And that doesn't mean that within an organization, structurally, every person is involved in every decision, because that's not feasible. But what I often ask leaders is, do your people feel heard? Because if we believe that commitment happens at the point of implementation, we miss the boat, right? Commitment happens at the point of creation. When your people feel like their voice matters, that they're an actual partner, that people listen, that people care, that people take their ideas and do something with it, then you're getting more out of them because they understand that they're being heard and that that's important.
So I want to jump into that one a little bit. You might have some other ideas, but let's get even granular. How do you listen to? How do you actually do that? Like, okay, how do they feel heard? Like, is that what does a meeting look like? What does a day look like? What does a leader do? They walk in and they, interrupt them. I mean, some things can be like, what is something good they could do to, enlist this commitment and show it to them?
For sure. I'll give you an example. And the reality is, the higher you go in leadership, the harder this becomes, or the more strategic you need to be in doing it. One of my clients is USAA down in San Antonio, and their mortgage company was run just up until recently by a gentleman named Winston. Everybody just referred to him as Winston. I don't even know his last name. But one of the things he did is once a week, he did what was called the Lunch with Winston, where he invited 5 people on his team, 5 different leaders. These are like supervisor level leaders. And at lunch, he didn't eat, they did. And he just sat down and he said, and he had a pen and a paper, and he said, give me your thoughts. What needs to change? What are your ideas? What are your struggles? What are the roadblocks? If you were in my shoes, what do I need to be thinking about? And he would take notes. I listened to him report 2 different times when I spoke for them. Once he said, at those Lunch with Winstons, we have identified 120 tangible ideas, and we have corrected or fixed or moved forward with 105 of those. The rest are in process. The next time, the number was even greater. But I sat there and watched 400 leaders look at the president of their associate or their organization, and I'm sitting there going, if you sat down with your president and you gave him an idea, and then you see it being implemented, and all of those ideas do they feel engaged? Absolutely, right? So that's just a simple example of how a leader at a very high level is doing that. It has to be on purpose. It has to be strategic. Now, I've seen it in other ways. I've seen companies, a credit union here in Utah that I was working with, they're moving office buildings, and they set up basically like a trade show for all their people to come through and vote on office furniture and look and feel of the new office. Just that kind of involvement, you have some kind of say. And then when you show up and the walls are blue and that's what you wanted, you feel like empowered a little bit, right? I mean, those are simple things, but the mentality, I think, then plays out in every meeting. Right? If you're the kind of leader that wants people's feedback, you're not just talking at people, you're talking with people. And so when you start to understand that from a principle standpoint, it plays out in every interaction you probably have.
I love it. Anything else any one last tip under partnership is the new leadership?
One thing that I think I teach around this idea that seems to be kind of an aha moment is, I think that partner leaders know that motivation is important, but it's overrated. And what I mean by that is, it's easy to think about leadership as motivation, right? You cheer people on, you tell them good job, you encourage them, and that's important. But on the other side, the more important piece is that our job as leaders is to get in the trenches and remove obstacles and inhibitors. And when we do that first, then that motivation becomes much more effective. Right? Because if somebody's just running into the wall, cheering them on doesn't help them in any way. And so really understanding the role of a leader is to clear the runway, is to open up the opportunity for them to run forward and to be successful at what they do. I think partner leaders do that extremely well.
I love it. You made me think of, I remember Caribou Coffee is one of the big in fact, in the 2000s, it moved to number 2 to Starbucks. It had a great run. There were several things that happened there. But one of the things the CEO, when I talked to him at that time, said they did is they listened well to that frontline barista. So that's why you'll see napkins that say, thanks a latte, or these different statements. And a lot of those came from those frontline. A lot of the ideas that happened, at least in a period of time, came from frontline baristas. That they had a feedback way to getting it to corporate and listening and implementing. And I think that's something we could all learn from, because a lot of times the feet on the ground in the front, they know the best. That's why I was just noticing we're working with a global pharmaceutical, and we use this enterprise trust index to survey people. And I can think in many organizations people are over-surveyed, but when you give people a space to give feedback, many times that survey will give an idea that is gold, that they change that one little thing and it starts to change everything. So thinking of these ways, I think it's really interesting. Actually, before I move from this, I want to ask just a macro question on this. Are there any things you're seeing for this partnership that a business owner should think about as far as structurally, whether that's, how the companies, we want to B Corps now, we want to have employee owned, are there things that are, there are challenges with each of those from both government tax issues and everything else. But I've even thought of, could we go employee owned? So what is that? Does that really work, or are there better ways to deal with it? What do you think?
I've seen it, the positive and negatives, I think, of all of those. And I think there's an argument to be made in each of those. I have a good friend who transitioned his company to a B Corp and watch that process, and it's not without challenge, right? There's definite benefit to it. I don't know that I have a set, this is the way every company should be, because I think every company is going to be a little bit different. I believe that the mentality is the biggest piece. Now, whether you give actual ownership to every person as a physical partner who has skin in the game, or we just help them mentally understand that we want them to take ownership and we want them to feel like they have full involvement and full engagement, and that they're valued. I don't know that there's a set answer for that one, at least from my opinion, because I could give you examples of pros and cons of probably both, right? As well as you could too. And so, I think if, depending on, your company or any other company, if they feel like that's the best way to go and they're in a position to do it, I think that's an awesome thing, because ownership, it's hard to just instill. If you can actually put it in place, then, you've got something there.
Hey, it's Ann with the Trust Edge team here. As you know, we are passionate about helping you and your team perform at your best. And that's why David wrote his new book, Trusted Leader. This true-to-life parable follows the story of a CEO who uncovers the root issue threatening his organization's success. And in the back half of the book, David provides a roadmap for even how to solve those root issues. Get Trusted Leader for your team, your organization, or even just for yourself at trustedleaderbook.com.
You got successful early on. I mean, in your 20s, you and your brother created this $20 million annual revenue company. What was the biggest learning? I mean, a lot of people that have success early, I've seen you still flourish. A lot of people, it's not the best thing for them.
Well, so it's interesting. I think there's several lessons that I learn, and I've thought about, obviously there's lessons along the way, but I think starting at such a young age, there were certain things that were obvious to me. For example, one, that I was just young enough and just dumb enough. I realized I have a lot to learn, and I will constantly have a lot to learn. And so understanding that mentality always needed to be there, to be hungry, to be constantly in the growth process. Otherwise you're dying, right? I recognize that business is about relationships and the importance of that. And that business is long-term. I didn't want to make short-sighted decisions, because the reality is I'm young. I want to be in business for the next 50 plus years and have people see me as somebody they want to do business with, as somebody who has a good reputation. I didn't want to hurt that. And so I didn't want to make any short-sighted decisions that way. And so there were lots of things that way, but I feel like the mentality, coming into it at a young age actually served me well, because I could recognize certain areas that I didn't have it figured out. And I still don't. I still, am learning along the way. And, we've had some good success, but I think that recognizing that it's a constant process. I mean, think about how much our world has changed in the last 18 months, right? I mean, and principles haven't changed, right? I wrote this book, Partnership is the New Leadership, before COVID, but there's different application now, and even probably more need for certain principles now than there were. And so understanding some of those things and what people are really dealing with, and learning how to have those conversations where you start to understand the needs, fears, and victories of people, and where you can serve and where you can add value. I think for me, that's a constant process. I don't feel like it's anything I've figured out and have achieved, because once you do, then you're behind already. So
start dying.
Yeah.
I want to talk about another one of your books because we believe in it so much. The Power of Storytelling. It's one of the key ways we talk about building the connection pillar of trust. It's something actually when people get certified as certified partners or coaches or facilitators in Trust Edge, we have a whole process on mining stories that are relevant, not being the hero of your own story, and also of using stories because stories make it sticky. Yes, we still like data. Yes, we want to back things by research, but stories have been used for centuries, millennia, to simplify the complex, to connect with people, to engage people, to move them forward, and actually to build trust. But tell us a glimpse of the power of storytelling in your perspective.
So just one thought that came to mind when you said that. I've used this quote, and this is really a weird, morbid quote, but it's going to stick with you. So Joseph Stalin, the dictator, he said something that is really disgusting, but also very true. He said, the death of one man is a tragedy. The death of a million is a statistic. Think about that for a minute. So I just think about the work that you do, because I share this idea with so many people who share statistics. You have incredible data, but emotionally, we don't connect with data the same way as we do a story. And so if we can take data and then synthesize it with one application story, that becomes very real and it becomes emotionally tangible, right? Something that we can act on, something we connect with. And so, I wrote the book, The Power of Storytelling, because for me, as we were building our sales organization, I found that stories were an incredible way to connect. This was just a personal aha. Literally, as I listened, I recorded every presentation I gave. All these sales presentations, I tried to eliminate and all these filler words as I did that. But I started asking the question, what caused people to engage? And inevitably, it was when I was telling stories. They laughed more, they asked more questions, they engaged. And so I went, that's crucial. I need to get better at that. And so I started practicing it and getting better at it. And then I started teaching our internal sales team some of these ideas and techniques. And then as I started speaking, my bent is as a storyteller, right? I tell a lot of stories, and people would ask me how to coach me on presentation skills or storytelling. And so I flushed it out to the power of storytelling to teach it as a skill. There's so many ways we could go with it, but I'll just give you one simple idea. I think every influential story follows a simple pattern, and that is struggle to solution. So the idea is that you hook people with the struggle, you help them with the solution, right? There's something in our bodies and our DNA that we respond to struggle, to conflict, to challenge. It naturally engages us. And the problem is often in business, we tell solution to solution stories. Right? I mean, think about a business story. Most of them sound the same. We say, you know what, we're great, and we've always been great, and we'll always be great. And if you work with us, that'd be great, right? I mean, and what's engaging about that? And so being real and vulnerable and hitting on that struggle that you solve, right? I mean, David, you solve huge struggles for people, and showing them, I know what you're dealing with, and here's a path forward. That's the kind of story that serves people and really becomes something that's effective. It requires a level of vulnerability. It requires a level of, introspection to understand some of those things. But I love that you teach, your facilitators how to mine those stories, because I get that question all the time. Like, where do you find these stories? How do you come up with them? And to me, they're everywhere. I mean, just all the time you're seeing stories pop up all over the place. And so part of it's just being aware and recognizing that, you need some of those. But yeah, I think stories serve us so well. I believe that storytelling is the most underrated skill in business.
Absolutely. I think, It's just like Buffett said something like the number one skill is basically being able to communicate or speak, actually, to speak, right? So that has something to do with it. Two things came to mind. One is in our business, I can remember this. When I started my trust work, I'm passionate about this as I'm seeing this, like, here's the research, trust affects the bottom line. It's all these things until I took, and you hear me today, I'll give a touch of the research, like in an hour keynote, 2 minutes, but I'll just simply give 3 quick analogies. Like, well, if you don't think it's kind of like they became mini stories. Actually, this one used to be a big story about a lock, and all of a sudden it just became, think of a lock. It's a representation of lack of trust. Think about what the cost is. I got to buy the lock, and I've got to, but the bigger cost is now I got to open it every time I go through the gate. And that's a cost of time. And I can say all the other costs, but all of a sudden in a simple visual, almost a story, that one's a mini story, an analogy, but that came from a big, long story. But 3 of those little stories, like, hey, write a text to someone you trust. Now write a text to someone you don't trust. How long does that take? I mean, oh, I get it. It's like the little cost. And then we have to have some longer, stickier ones. But I just saw the criticalness of simplifying the complex story. I think Lou Gertner at IBM, he said, you go to these earning calls with IBM, like, you can't tell everything. You can't say everything. So you just, here's why we do so well. I can tell a good story.
Yeah, I think great communicators, like you said, make complex ideas very simple. Stories and metaphors are probably 2 of your best, tools to be able to do that. And I've heard you speak; you do that incredibly well. And to take that amount of data and research and make it tangible, make it something that I can grab onto and use. Stories are one of the best ways you can do that.
Makes it relevant, to use your term.
Yeah, for sure.
One quote that came to mind just as you were talking also, and partly with was it Stalin? Stalin quote. We don't always quote Stalin on the Trusted Leadership. So back when I was really learning to speak, and one thing we're similar, I think, in like this: get better, find coaches, find mentors, whether it's for me for research, for marriage, for health, or for speaking. And you and I have had a lot of coaches and a lot of mentors in that. But I remember over 20 years ago now, he was the head of Imagineering at Disney. Okay. And he said, David, he was kind of took me under his wing a little bit about speaking and training and what we're doing. And he said, as you know, I never want to be a stand-up comic. I've taken stand-up comedy. I've taken improv. I've taken all these things just to be able to transfer an idea that I'm passionate about better, right? But one of the things he had me do is he said, David, you've got to go to the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee, and watch these storytellers. And it was unbelievable. And, in this tiny little town in Tennessee, thousands and thousands of people show up for this little time. You can't, because they don't have the infrastructure for it. You got to stay 100 miles away just to go in each day practically. But one quote that came to mind, and I'll never forget it. There's a little storytelling museum, and the town is known for storytelling. It's just a quaint, beautiful little place. And the quote was something, if I can get it almost exact, was, perhaps if we knew everyone's stories, there would be no more war. Mm. And I think it ties back a little bit to what you said, what your Stalin quote. I'm not going to let that go. If we know everybody's individual stories, it's not a statistic. If we know the statistic, all these people are dying, all this is happening. If I know that one, that matters, right? Yeah, and we could start to, as speakers, we could start to make fun of the starfish story here, but there's truth to it, right? Yeah. So
it's why it's stood the test of time. Like, we're all sick of it, and we think, because it's not unique, it's not our own, which just brings up an interesting thought around storytelling, and that is that the more personal a story is, the more powerful it becomes. Because when you start to share a story and I go, I've heard this one, I automatically check out. But if you're sharing your own experience, like, that's uniquely yours. No one else can share that. Nobody else has. Nobody shares it with the same passion. I believe that you don't retell a story, you relive a story. And when you relive a story, if it's yours, you bring emotion back into it, and you share it with that unique passion, because that's something that impacted your life. And therefore you create a better experience for the user who's listening as well.
Let's get personal for a little bit. I found, at least in all my interviews and just watching and walking by leaders that I do like and trust, do really believe in. As you know, there are people that look a certain way on stage and a certain way off stage. I'm talking about ones that are different than that. They seem to lead themselves well, and though imperfectly, each of us, they do maybe they have routines or habits that help them lead themselves well. What do you do to lead yourself well so you can influence so many others?
So, yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who I don't tend to ever really run out of energy, and so I'm going most of the time, right? Like I just will keep moving forward. So if you look at this morning, we're doing this. It's 8 a.m. my time when we started. I got up at 6. I went and ran with my boys. Got in a workout with them. Then had some time that I did some personal reading. As a family, as the kids were getting going, we do some scripture study and some things as a family every morning before everybody gets off, and say prayers together and get all the kids going and move that forward. That's a pretty normal routine. Like, those things happen for me. Time for personal development, time for family development, the physical piece. You and I have talked about that. I was actually impacted quite a bit by you. We had lunch maybe a year or two ago. You were in Salt Lake, and you had just lost some weight. Like, it was evident to me when we got together, and you just made the point that one of your jobs specifically was staying healthy, right? And being in shape and being fit, which, in what we do with the amount of travel, with the amount of stage time and that kind of thing, that becomes an important piece. And looking at it as a job, which I look at, like, my own personal development reading is part of my job, because I'm looked at as a thought leader. How can I not have that be part of my job, right?
We talked about this yesterday as a team. We hired a new team member, and we said one of the things, and there are many things with our work, not just David speaking and training and all that, then writing books and whatever. It's also the Enterprise Trust Index. It's also the consulting and coaching and certification work. But for me, we talked about how David's 5 jobs. If 5 key jobs, these, and one of them, like you said it, one of them is content. It's that study piece. You and I both see. I'm going to just share 2 of them because they're so relevant to what you said. One of them is that content piece. You and I have seen people that are saying the same thing they were 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And you and I have also seen people that have finished well or are finishing well. The people that are staying fresh and relevant. The Ken Blanchards of the world. The people that are they're not. They might believe the old principles still, of course, but they're saying and they're relevant, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a big deal. I can even tell when I'm super fresh or not, right? I got too busy there. I was whatever. The other thing is, yes, the 5th truth for me is, well, the team comes into the offices, and the team's kind of, our schedule's pretty much 8 to 5-ish, because I'm flying late or getting up early or doing this or that or whatever it is, I can come in late and have worked out, and that is part of my job, because the 5th piece for me is healthy heart and home. And that's my part of my job description, to keep a healthy heart and home. Because if you're flying to Dubai, and speaking of this event, and I was telling them yesterday, one time I got into Nairobi at midnight, spoke every day for a week, and flew out. I mean, or trained or worked with government officials or whatever. You have to. I learned, and a doctor, motivated me too. If you want to be doing this, you've got to stay super healthy. And by the way, it's a little easier for you under 40, I would say. So you got to keep those habits. Keep those habits. I love it. So I love the routine. That's a great, simple routine. I think some people have such complex ones. It's like, hey, I get up, I go work out, I have this personal input time, and then I have this family and faith time. And I think that'd be a good start for a lot of people.
Yeah. And, some days are different than others, right? If I'm on the road, different, but prioritizing those things. I can't tell you how many times I have been standing in the middle of the airport, listening to or reading scriptures or saying prayers with my family, because that's a priority in our family, right? I mean, everybody's going to do their own things, but in the morning, at night, that's something that we do. My wife and I have our own things that we do to talk and connect and grow together on a daily basis. And the reality is when we get off on those things, right, when those things aren't consistent, it throws everything off, right? And so there's some of those things that we've committed to be consistent on personally, as a couple, as a family, and those things are prioritized above everything else, in the fact that we make sure they happen, right? They might happen in a weird way. Sometimes literally, like my wife is reading something to me that we're supposed to be reading, and I'm like sitting on an airplane, not supposed to be on my phone, but we're going to make it happen. We're going to figure out how to do it.
Hey, it's Sam from the Trust Edge team. Most training and development initiatives don't last or even solve the root issue hindering your organization. That's where Trust Edge coaching certification comes in. Trust Edge coaches are equipped with a suite of tools to identify, benchmark, and close gaps in trust for good. Because when you solve the real issue, you get measurable results in a culture where people actually want to make an impact. So whether you're a coach with your own clients or a leader training people inside your organization, check out trustedgecoaching.com and see how you can start solving the root issue and get lasting results in your business. And now back to the show.
So let's talk about home leadership, and especially of your kids. This has been a fun journey to watch. You've got some amazing ninja warriors, and you've taken your whole home and outside and everything and created this space. I think others even now come and go to your ninja gym, right?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy what it's.
And now you're even speaking about this, right? I saw one of your newer talks that you're talking about is the ninja mindset. So, yeah. But let's talk about this journey with your kids, because I think it's a fun one. Give us 2 minutes on this.
So my oldest daughter, she plays soccer and great. And there's awesome lessons there. And then my next 3 kids, specifically my 2 boys that are now 12 and 11, they found the show American Ninja Warrior. They became obsessed and started getting into it, started training, taking classes, competing, became very, very good. The long story short of that is they're both, top 5 nationally ranked ninjas. One of my sons, Drew, has just been on the show American Ninja Warrior Junior, which comes out on Peacock starting next week. And so you'll see him on that if you watch that show coming up. And we've built all sorts of obstacles in our backyard. We took the basketball court, which was my passion, and that went out the window, because that's what happens when you have kids, is it becomes their passion, right? And we built this big ninja gym, and in the back, and my kids are little entrepreneurs, because I don't know how else to think, and so they teach classes, and can kind of support their habit this way, because we literally travel all over the country, for ninja competitions and things like that, and so they're paying for all of this because they teach classes every week and have 50 kids that show up and pay them $10 an hour to come and be in their classes and learn from them, and it's pretty cool to watch. But the reason I've started speaking on it is because I've jumped in and am coaching them, and there are so many incredible lessons in the sport. I mean, you are dealing with fear constantly. You are dealing with constant failure. I mean, you think about, like, they see a new obstacle and they will fail it for hours and hours and hours to finally figure this thing out, to crack the code on it, right? And so understanding that failure is not the stopping point, it's a stepping stone. It's about growth. It's unlocking progress every single time. I mean, it's literally last night I was giving a speech and we were talking about just training partners. Part of why I think my boys have become so good is because they train together. And then our next door neighbor, who's 15, who's also a nationally ranked ninja, the 3 of them train together and they push each other. And, you get better when you're around high performers. It stretches you, and one of them unlocks a skill, and all of a sudden everybody else has to do it too. And so I just think there's some awesome lessons.
I've got one for you. I think everybody's dealt with this. They've got somebody. It could be their kid. It could be their employee. It could be somebody else that's afraid of something.
Oh, for sure.
So how do you, it's one thing to tell, there's a lot of even books written on how do I overcome fear. I've got, some people know about my drowning accident and stuck underwater for whatever, even though I was lifeguard and whatever. And it's made me claustrophobic to some degree for the last 20 years. But how do you coach someone else to overcome fear? Because I don't to say, okay, just do it. Come on. There's a mindset of, well, if you just face your fears, when I have seen that backfire big time. How do you coach someone on in the midst of fear?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things, but I also think it's individual, right? I think about my boys, and I coach both of them differently because they have very different personalities. One of them, I can get in his face and he responds to that. The other one, he crumbles. Like, that's not effective there, right? But I think there's a couple things. I mean, giving voice to your fear, saying it out loud, writing it down, like understanding what it is. There's something cathartic about that, just to simply go, okay, I am afraid. I'm afraid of this. Then approaching it with curiosity, asking some of those questions, right? It's not as effective for me to say, you don't need to be afraid of that, but asking the question of, okay, what are you truly afraid of right here? What are the consequences of this? Where do you feel that in your body? What does that feel like? How is that manifesting? Just some of those types of things. I do think there are times that you do just have to kind of jump and do it, but it's not every time, right? I mean, the way that we process fear, we kind of have to figure out what makes sense and how we manage through that. But fear's real. Last week I was speaking for the Florida Realtors Association. And these are all, realtors that are entrepreneurs, and we're having this conversation. And I bring up these ideas. We talked about fear, failure, and focus. And when I talked about fear and started asking them questions about it, what holds them back and what they're afraid of, I mean, these people are in tears sharing what's stopping them in their careers right now. One lady shared, it's embarrassment. I cannot even fathom being embarrassed. I don't want to put myself out there because I don't want to look stupid. Like, we all have certain fears that are stopping us in different ways. And so understanding those gives us a leg up, right? I mean, instead of just kind of going, okay, we typically just kind of walk away from it and don't explore it. And I think fear is something to be explored.
Just a couple more questions. I know we got to land the plane here. There's so much fun and so much we could talk about, but I'm interested in something these days a lot, and that is curious questions. What I've noticed, you said something about you got to ask the questions. And let's even jump off of fear, but take leadership, which you're an expert in as a whole. I've noticed in the boards that I sit on, in the leadership teams that I work with, really many of the best, at least strategic thinkers, are just brilliant at asking great questions. What are a couple of your favorite questions, or even one if you have one? Maybe it's for something specific. Maybe it's just as a leader.
Yeah, I agree. I think asking questions is a skill set. I think it's something that can and needs to be developed. I think that for me, I observed and continue to observe great leaders where I go, wow, like, that's who's leading this conversation. It's not the person talking, it's the person asking the right questions.
Undeniably.
One question that I always come back to is the question after the question. I think we ask great questions sometimes when we hear what we want to hear, and then we just jump on it. But just a little bit deeper, like, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Unpack that just a little bit more. Just that second, maybe even third chance to flush it out before just being responsive, before running with an idea. I think that often when we will do that, we get the deeper meaning behind something and not just the cliche idea that we were looking for.
There's a big problem with that, and that is it takes patience.
Which high achievers often don't have, right?
Exactly.
So,
I would say a recovering impatient. I mean, that's a big challenges for drivers. I deal with it every day in myself. Your driver, there's a God-given gift in moving things forward in the midst of immense challenge, but that has to be balanced with patience and pause and curiosity. And I'm enjoying, and not always enjoying, learning a lot about that still today. So
at the process.
Hey, what's left for Ty Bennett? You got a whole lot of life left. What's one thing you're hoping for down the road still?
So writing is such a good process for me, but I love speaking. Like, truly love speaking. Being in front of an audience, there's nothing better than that in the entire world to me. And so that's something I plan on doing, hopefully forever. and want to continue to connect with audiences and make an impact. And I truly love that. There's other things that I'm going to do in terms of investments and other things like that. And, we'll see for my kids. I mean, literally my boys, and I think they're on track, want to be part of this American Ninja Warrior Junior show, and then be some of those early teens that get on the adult show and have a chance to win $1 million. We'll see what that ever turns into. But the thing that I love about all of this is the life lessons that it's teaching is they're starting to understand how to drive themselves. They're starting to understand these principles behind it. And more than anything, what I love about the fact that I'm taking those principles and making it into a speech and content is that they're seeing that and understanding that content. So it's not just they're living it, but they can step out of it and go, oh, that's true. We are learning about growth and how to push through. And, and I actually have my boys as part of, some of those keynotes. And so that piece of it involving my family as they get older, your kids are a little bit older than mine. And these stages where they can be part of some of those things, that's the coolest thing in the world to me.
It's really great. I think a mentor of mine said, give your kids experiences, not stuff. Yeah. And I was thinking in some of our work in East Africa, they've been, I think, most of them to the Indian Ocean more than the Pacific or Atlantic, at least for a while. And I just think if you can, I mean, we all have different things we can give our kids, but in our space, how do we do anything with? And as you know, with both of us flying out quite a bit, how do we bring them in on this? And it is interesting as they grow up how that can change. So that's awesome. Yeah. I got one last question for you before I do it. Hey, where can everybody find the most about you if they're interested in the books, the speaking, or just connecting?
Yeah, tybennett.com, just my name. And you can find me on any social media by the same name. So pretty easy to find, I think. There are not a lot of other Ty Bennetts out there trying to do what I'm doing. So I'd love to connect with anybody.
That's awesome. David Horsager also has that benefit of not many out there with that name. The problem with that name is people being able to spell it, right? So, all right, tybennett.com. All of this will be in the show notes and more. So check out the show notes. Last question, Ty. It's the Trusted Leader Show. Who's a leader you trust and why?
The person who came to mind for me is not somebody that most people would know. A mentor of mine named Ulysses Soares. He's Brazilian. Is a spiritual leader for me. And the reason I trust him is, one, I've known him for 21 years now. He has invested in me in unique and personal ways. His time, his understanding, he's mentored. But I've also never seen him not live his values. I've never seen him be hypocritical or contradict, what he professes to be. He's lived that and continues to live that. And I've seen him give more of himself to other people than most people would even say you should. And because of that, he's loved and admired and revered for that. So yeah, I trust him with my life. If he called me, and I talked to leaders about this idea of investing in people and what that means. I mean, if he called me today and said, Ty, I need you to sell your house and, come and help me with it. Like, there would be no hesitation in some of those things, right? Because some people we just hold in that regard. And I think that those are the things that we need to be doing as leaders, for other people.
Check out the show notes. Check out Ty Bennett. Ty, this has been a privilege. Thanks for being on, sharing your wisdom. Thanks for being my friend. Thanks for the great work you're doing around the world. And that's been the Trusted Leader Show. Until next time, stay trusted.